This is Norman Mineta, and this is a story about Mineta's bat. For people like me who were born and raised in San Jose, California, Norman Mineta is a household name. Our airport is named after him, and so is one of our busiest freeways. But the story that I'm about to tell you might not be familiar even to San Jose natives. As a young boy, there were two things that Norman loved: the Boy Scouts and baseball. You don't get much more American than that. Nevertheless, Norman's Americanness was challenged in 1942 when war broke out between the US and Japan, and Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, effectively treating all Japanese Americans as enemy aliens. Suddenly, this all-American boy, along with his entire family, was forced out of their home and sent to live in an internment camp in Heart Mountain, Wyoming. Only being allowed to bring what they could carry, Norman describes that day like this. On that day that we left, I was wearing my Cub Scout uniform. Baseball glove, baseball bat. And as I got on the train, the MPs confiscated my bat. Luckily for Mineta, the Heart Mountain internment camp was allowed some creature comforts, including its own Boy Scout troop. But being confined to a prison camp meant no camping or hiking excursions beyond the walls of the camp. Since the boys couldn't go out, the scout leaders thought that maybe other boys could come in. As Mineta recalls, our scout leaders would write to the scouts in all the towns surrounding Heart Mountain, "Come on in for our jamboree," and they'd write back and say, No, those are prisoners of war, so we're not going in there." Out of all the Boy Scout troops in all of Wyoming, only one troop ever came. One of those boys, Al Simpson, remembers it like this. One week, the scoutmaster told us that we were going out to a giant internment camp where 11,000 Japanese Americans were being detained for the duration of World War II. Simpson was understandably reluctant to go in. As he recalls, there was barbed wire all around the damn thing, and guard towers, and guys with guns and searchlights all aimed inside. Wouldn't you as a 12-year-old kid think there was something in there? When he asked his scoutmaster why they had to go inside, the answer was simple: because there are Boy Scouts in there. He followed it up by saying, "They're Americans just like us." When Simpson arrived at the camp, he was assigned to sleep in the same pup tent as Mineta, and very quickly, the two realized that they were cut from the same cloth. Over the course of the war, the two became fast friends, despite the world around them trying to pit them as enemies. After the war, the Mineta family eventually returned to their life in San Jose, but the scars of being betrayed by their fellow Americans remained. Mineta determined that the reason that he and almost 100,000 other Japanese Americans, most of them U.S. citizens, were denied their basic protections under the law was that the Japanese American community had nobody on their side in the government. As Mineta described it, "I always felt strong about accessibility. I think again it goes back to my own experience in terms of the evacuation and internment. We didn't have access to our political leaders at the time." So, Mineta decided to be that leader and to give access to the people in his community without a voice. Norm moved from the city council to becoming the first Japanese American mayor of a major U.S. city. Shortly after that, he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, and while he was rising through the ranks of politics, he got a letter from an unlikely source: his old friend from the Boy Scouts, Al Simpson. He remembers it this way: "In 1974, I got elected to the House of Representatives, and in 1978, he got elected to the U.S. Senate, so our friendship was reunited. It was as if we reverted back to 1943, living in that pup tent." But just as they had been on other sides of the fence at that internment camp, now they found themselves on opposing sides of the legislature. Simpson, a staunch Republican, and Mineta, a lifelong Democrat. Once again, society had decided to pit them against each other as enemies, and once again, their friendship proved stronger. Perhaps the most important legislation that Mineta is remembered for is the 1988 Civil Liberties Act, a bill that made the U.S. government redress and apologize for the unfair treatment of Japanese American citizens during World War II. Although this bill was proposed by Mineta in the House of Representatives, it was co-sponsored by Al Simpson and passed in the Senate in no small part due to Simpson fiercely championing it and defending it. It was this bill that would later lead to Mineta being awarded the Martin Luther King Jr. Commemorative Medal. After accepting this award, Mineta told the story about the Army MPs confiscating his bat when he was sent away to the internment camp. The story so touched one baseball fan that he decided to send a Hank Aaron autographed bat as a gift to the congressman. However, due to a House restriction on receiving valuable personal gifts, Mineta had to return the bat, as it was valued at over $1,500. To that, he was rumored to say, "The damn government's taken my bat again." Mineta went on to serve in the cabinet of both Bill Clinton and George W. Bush as the Secretary of Transportation. This is the department that handles air travel, which means that Mineta was in charge of all flights during and after the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001. Because of his experiences as a child, he did everything in his power to protect the rights of Muslim and Middle Eastern Americans in the wake of the terror attacks. Just days after, he wrote a letter to all U.S. airlines strictly prohibiting racial profiling or unfair security screening for Muslims. He strictly warned them against discrimination of passengers based on race or religion, and he brought swift administrative action against violators. He was also an outspoken opponent of New York's stop and frisk policy, which he felt unfairly targeted Sikh Americans. Mineta and Simpson remain friends to this day, over 75 years after they first met. Mineta puts it this way: "When we get together, we always revert back to being 12 years old." On one occasion, Mineta recalls, "One time we were having dinner, and this guy comes up and says, 'Senator Simpson, you're a conservative Republican, and Mineta is a liberal Democrat. Now tell me, what's the biggest difference between the two of you?' Alan thought a bit and said, 'I wear 17D shoes, and he wears 8.5D. Now before you lose sleep over that bat, after retiring from politics, Mineta finally got that Hank Aaron bat from the generous donor, and as far as we know, the government has not taken it away."